Mercedes. And I think if Lucky had a part two, they would get a chapter on it for sure. And this
Yes.
season is going to be quite an important one in that whole journey because for Mercedes, it's the last one with this generation of cars. I think they'll firstly be glad in a way that this whole nightmare has come to an end. But how good is their final package? Because it seems like they've changed a lot. Like just looking at the design of their side pods, it felt like wow, they're learning from others. Like they've gone back to a totally different base. And when I compare this to what we saw in 2022 with the zero pods and everything that they did around that, it feels like a complete U-turn. Expected, yes, but again, we'll now find out if it's too little too late. Do you think, firstly, their running was very representative? Because Russell and Antonelli were very confident, but there's a caveat to that, isn't there?
Well, it's a caveat to anyone's testing performance, isn't there? You just never know. I think we could expect Mercedes probably will running quite high fuel loads. You know, they're not out to grab glory. They don't need to do that. I think what they need to do is to prove how that car is working. And evidence on track is that it doesn't suffer with some of the problems that their previous cars have had. And again, everything we say is covered by this. It was only Bahrain in the hot, for 3 days. But the car certainly looked a lot more comfortable. It didn't seem to have all of those horrible traits of a snappy rear end and bouncing and just general instability and not being particularly comfortable with its tyres. So it looks as though and I've said this every year since the end of 2022, they looks like they've learnt their lesson. This car looks like it, visually from the outside, it looks like it's the improvement that they were seeking. But, as I say, I've said that many times, but I think this year, or more than the other years, I think there is optimism that actually looks like they may have got the formula right in getting the performance out of these cars. But, they're coming from a long way back. I think there is a big jump in performance in this chassis. That's, almost undoubtedly the case. But, is that going to throw up other problems? They were very canny, very wise with their tyre management last year. They didn't have the fastest car, and in the race, although some days the weather conditions got away from how they could work their tyres, they've always been very good at managing their tyres through the race. That's almost their trump card. If they're given a faster car, you know, all so much the better. Because I think a lot of this year will be about race tyre management. I mean, who qualifies on pole could become unimportant. I mean, I think certainly last year to me it felt like it was. As long as you're towards the front and you've got your tyre management right and your strategy right with that as well. So I think that's what Mercedes have certainly been concentrating on rather than trying to get glory runs. But everything looks like it's coming together. And Antonelli wants to come out and prove himself. He's a young lad. He's obviously clearly got lots of talent. Lots of people know, drivers far better than me, highly rate him. And I think equally, I think George wants to establish himself as, a kind of, not so much the number one driver at Mercedes, but, kind of one of Formula One's top drivers. He's, very much, as much as I think underneath maybe he's quite a quiet and retiring guy. So I think he really wants to put himself out there and present himself as, a future champion. And I think he's trying to do that by just putting solid work in with the car, and makes for, again, another interesting dynamic within the team through the year. And again, Antonelli, you'd expect him to have a little benefit in the early races, and then that dip, as most rookies tend to have, and then they kind of work out where they were going wrong and then come back again. So it's going to be a season of changes for Mercedes. But maybe the other question then is, at what point do they kind of pack up pushing hard on this year and worry about next year? But, I think that's the same question for many teams. I think Mercedes could be tempted to pack up earlier.
Yeah, and Kimi Antonelli has actually been testing all of last year to try and get as much mileage in the car this year.